And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center deep in this heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us, where you can find our Civil Liberties blog, as well as links to our YouTube and our Spreaker podcast pages. Our first guest of distinction tonight has only got a limited amount of time to be with us, so let's jump right in. Anyone who's watched this show over our last 6 years understands that our concern with education is paramount to just about every other issue that we face on this show. On a personal level, I believe that as a parent, education is the most important gift that you can give to your child, in addition to a loving home. I also happen to believe that parents ultimately should be the ultimate arbiter of, if you will, guiding, as they get older, your children's economic, educational opportunities. And I also believe, on a personal level, and as a libertarian, that government, sadly, has no role, really, or should have no role, in education. Rhode Island, in particular, is at a crossroads. The Johns Hopkins University team of researchers that visited Rhode Island this past year found deplorable conditions, not just structurally in terms of the schools, brick and mortar, but also in terms of the performance of children at this school, creating, if you will, as I call it, somewhat controversially, an educational holocaust here in the state. We've got schools in this state that perform at a sub 10% achievement level based on a, shall we say, an achievement objective that is not challenging, to say the least. It's my contention that we are graduating an entire generation of students from a variety of economic backgrounds who are essentially functionally illiterate. None other than the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post have weighed in at the editorial level, not the op-ed, but the editorial level, pointing out the failures of Providence schools. So rather than, as some of my compatriots would do, rather than obsess with, pointing fingers, although astonishingly at the city of Providence level, there's been none of that. There's been no accountability since the reports were issued. We were trying to come up with solutions. It is my great pleasure and honor to have joining us tonight Robert C. Enlow. He's the president and CEO of EdChoice. Of course, he can be found at edchoice.org. Before the establishment of EdChoice in 2016, as you can imagine, I'm taking this directly from the website, he was an integral part of the Milton and Rose Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice. He served as a fundraiser, projects coordinator, vice president, and executive director prior to being named president and CEO of the foundation in 2009. Under his tutelage and leadership, if you will, EdChoice has become one of the most successful and respected organizations advocating for educational choice. He's worked in dozens of states to propose solutions that are based on performance, as well as theory and philosophy. The organization is actively disseminating research, actively involved in training, actively sponsoring seminars, conducting advertising, and essentially providing grassroots support for folks across the nation, regardless, again, of geography, regardless of economics, with the tools necessary to promote educational choice so that our children can exceed. It's always been my contention that all kids are great kids, but ultimately they need to be given opportunities and the tools necessary, to not just become great kids, but become fulfilled adults. Again, an astonishing background, including working in England, where he has worked literally amongst the poorest in England, providing educational opportunities at places like St. Botolph's Project, providing care and services to homeless men, women, and families. So the folks that we're having on tonight to discuss this aren't simply, shall we say, theorists operating at an ivory tower, pointing down to the nattering classes below and coming up with the idea du jour on how to right the ship. Our guest has spent years in the trenches actively working in education in some of the most direst circumstances. On top of that, he attended Oxford University. So, first of all, I'd like to welcome you to the Coalition. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday night as we approach the holidays. We're grateful for the opportunity to chat with you. You have worked in an astounding array of educational opportunities, yet there seems to be one constant, and that's the need for choice. Tell us about how you got involved in this, how this essentially became your life's work, and why, and if you could define educational choice, and why is it so critical for children, well, not just in the United States, but anywhere?
I appreciate that, Pat, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. So I was very lucky in life, right? Like many people around our state, our country. I got born into a family that had the ability and the means to choose. And so I went to public school early on through sixth grade, and then I got sent to boarding school out in Long Island. Back then boarding school was a bad thing to do, right? It was super trouble. But I went there, and it was this incredibly elite place, and I got there through no merit of my own, but just because my family could afford it. And I said to myself, there seems to be something wrong here. There seems to be something unjust. There was no diversity. There was certainly no income diversity. There was very little racial diversity. And so what's wrong with this picture? Why am I having access and capability of getting access to this incredible education, right? Where I'm in the seventh grade and reading Homer, and I'm in this eighth grade and reading all of Dante, all right? And all of these incredible experiences I had struck me as this was wrong. There was something wrong that we couldn't enable every family to have that. And so that began my life's work of basically trying to find out what the problems are and find out what the solution is. And my view of choice is very simple. I want the families who move from one public school district to another when they buy a house, I just want them to have the same opportunity to go to any school. Right? The goal here is that we should allow families the freedom to go to whatever school type they want, whether that's public, private, charter, at home, online, or 1,000 ways we haven't thought about here. Our goal is to truly empower families with the means to be able to get the education that's best for their kids. And in the future, that may be something like, I'm going to spend 3 days in a public school and 2 days in a private school. Or maybe 1 day online and 4 days at a charter school. We haven't really begun to break up what the problem is. And what you've learned in Rhode Island is that the problem, right, that you're facing is a systemic one that is incapable to be solved by government, right? Mm-hmm. So you've seen through the Johns Hopkins report that the kids are performing at abysmal levels, that there are safety concerns, that school leaders are not set up for success, that parents are marginalized and demoralized, that kids can barely 20% proficiency in math. This has been going on for decades. And the only reason it's going on is because parents don't have the financial means to get the heck out of Dodge. And so the goal here is to allow all families the freedom to move, and particularly those families who need it most. I say this all the time. People who oppose the idea of school choice, whether it be education savings accounts or school vouchers or tax credits or any other way to get families more options, they oppose them because, it says it takes money away from our public school system. Well, that's rubbish, first of all, because in Providence you're giving $17,000 a kid to get 20% proficiency. And the average private school in Rhode Island cost a K-8 school cost about $6,000.
Right.
So the goal here, Pat, is to have a wide array of choices and options for families, because that's what they need and that's what they want. And every child needs something different. They need some place that they can fit in, and not every single school environment works for every single child. So even the proposed takeover by your governor of the school system is not going to solve the problem, because the problem is, in fact, that the only delivery mechanism for education for most families is a traditional public school, which, by the way, they call a neighborhood school, but often isn't actually in your neighborhood. What we want is more local control, more family control, and the money to follow kids.
At what point in time did this seemingly unbreakable linkage occur in our history where our entire taxing system here, in terms of property taxes in most states, our government, in terms of this independence, if you will, from all accountability with many, many school boards. And again, many school boards are well-meaning. Some of them are actually run very efficiently. But by and large, particularly here in Rhode Island, they are, to use your words, abysmal failures. When did this unbreakable linkage take place? And why do you think philosophically, historically, we can't seem to move beyond that?
Well, so this is a great question, and one that goes back to, if you really want to go all the way back to 1647. But let's go forward a little bit more. So our linkage, here's who you can blame. You can blame Thomas Jefferson for part of this, right?
Okay.
So Thomas Jefferson said that we should allow for a sum of property tax to pay for the building of schools. Mm-hmm. Now, his idea for schooling was only children of elite families should get it, and free children, not children who were slaves or not women, right?
Right.
But the idea was that you tax yourselves. Now, after that, along comes Horace Mann in the 1840s and James Blaine, and they basically say, hey, schooling should be taught in a common way, because they didn't like Catholics, right? It's very interesting. If you look at the rise of our modern public schools movement, right, and the common schools movement in the 1840s, there was a wave of immigration that was coming into our country from, guess where? Greece and Spain and southern Italy and Ireland, all the poor countries, right? The immigrants that weren't from the proper European type of nations. And people didn't like that. They didn't want papism to be taught. And so Horace Mann got together with a bunch of his groups of folks and said, let's start this common school movement. Now, guess where he learned to get this idea from? He went and visited Prussia and found that the Prussian classrooms were set up in rows where children were in desks and the teacher was in front. So this is essentially what happened. So he made it, so Jefferson linked it to property tax. Horace Mann basically created a system where your classroom looks the same, and then he said you have to go based on where you live. And for a while that worked because there were 100,000 school districts in 1930. But today there are 13,000, and so you centralized the problem tremendously. And so now not only do you have a requirement that you have to go where you live, it's free at the point of delivery, you now actually are taught in a certain way, in a standardized way, and that actually is what the federal government has been coming in and doing, right? So now they come in the 1960s and say it's time for, or 1950s, it's time for us to come in and tell you how to teach. And so you have this incredible growth of a monopoly over time, to the point where now it's almost impossible to get a holistic review of quality, right? You're gonna have some traditional schools which are great, but the system is never going to be allowed to innovate in the way it needs to innovate. And so it's a long-term problem here, and the solution has to be So Milton Friedman's idea was very simple. You separate the government financing of education from the government running of schools. And so we believe in the government financing of education because it's really important. I just don't think we have to have government-run schools. Perfect example of this. In the 60s, when Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon, right? And we put billions of dollars of taxpayer money into it. What did he do? Did he say, I'm going to take billions of dollars of public funds because we want to go to the moon and make the government create the rocket? No. He gave it to Raytheon, he gave it to Lockheed, and they gave it to all the private companies and the other companies that got together to try and solve problems to get to the moon. And so this is exactly what we're talking about. We should fund education but not run schools.
Under the Carter administration, if I remember correctly, you had the onset of the Federal Department of Education.
Yes, so the Carter administration made it a cabinet-level position. The actual first law was in 1867, and it actually was a small department, and it was, and if you know education, you'll hear the language here which is used. There was a department that was set up to collect data on the condition of education. And actually, that's the annual document that the United States Department of Education puts out every year, the general condition of education. So it was 1867, but it wasn't a cabinet-level department until 1970, under Carter, 1980, sorry.
Now we flash forward to the 21st century. And
yeah, we spent a lot of time now back in the old days. So let's go to the 21st century.
all right, we've come to understand that many children learn differently, whether it be neurological/medical conditions like dyslexia, whether it be any one of the vaunted and serious alphabet soup of ADHDs, ADDs. Children process and read differently. How is it possible in the 21st century that we would still ascribe a one-stop, one approach to education? And why would we think that it would be efficient to be administered at a high top-down government approach? How is that possible?
Because I think we have confused what we've experienced in education with what the purpose of education is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So we've allowed, and you're starting to see this disconnect with government in other areas, right? Now, let me explain what I mean. So we are now clearly in an age where we need criminal justice reform, right? You've
Correct.
seen it. We all done it. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason for that is because the government on the back end, right, of a child's life has been oppressive as all get out on the way they treat children, particularly children who are poor, children who are black, right? It's been awful. And everyone knows that the government has not provided the level of service necessary and needed. And yet there's a disconnect because on the front end, people are willing to hand their kids to the same government that will screw them over on the back end.
Right.
And so one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is how is it that we allow ourselves, and part of it is because of good old gerrymandering, and I'll tell you what I mean. When a wealthy family can pick up and move and go where they want, they don't really need to care about anyone else. And rightfully so. They should care about their own kid. I have no problem with that. But the problem is the system is set up to actually help those families who can move and not those families who are left behind. And so the very nature of public education has been subverted, I think, because it's not really serving the public interest anymore. And the public interest would be to create a publicly funded system of opportunities, regardless of where families go.
Mm-hmm. And in effect, in my opinion, it's being held hostage by what I call the educational industrial complex, where it would appear that the real focus of many public school departments is on supporting a network of hanger-ons, consultants, an entire industry of people who are more dedicated to analysis of education than actually impacting and delivering an education to students.
Well, yeah, let me give you a perfect example of that, right? Mm-hmm. So between 1950 and 2015, American public education saw a 100% increase in the number of students. So 100% increase in the number of students, right? So doubled. A 241% increase in the number of teachers, and a 709% increase in the number of non-teachers.
Wow.
So in that period of time, between 1950 and 2015, you basically 7 times the amount of student enrollment, you increased administrators. Mm-hmm. And so now you have, like, I'll never forget this, you have someone who is a video monitor, right? Which they do is they bring in video carts to classrooms. Mm-hmm. That's their entire job, right, in some school districts. You have school districts that still have brick masons, right, that still have stenographers.
Right.
And these are hired groups, right? And so one other question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we get to the 21st century in education if we're not willing to actually get out of the way we deliver the product of education, the way we're doing it, right? And that's basically saying the schools are required to do everything. And that's just not what it should be. The schools should be educating our kids in an environment that works and letting the families and the communities solve all these other problems. And in fact, now what they do is they blame parents for the problems in the schools. I say this all the time. This system of education is the only place I've ever seen where the provider of a product can blame the consumer of a product for the failure of a product. Right? So just think about
that's
that. That's
very well said. I'm going to steal that, by the way. That's outstanding.
Right? And you look at Rhode Island, right? So if you look at this in Rhode Island's time, in the same period of time, in the last, actually between 2000, what is this chart? I've been looking at a chart on edchoice.org, between 1992 and 2014. The state of Rhode Island saw a 0% increase in the number of students, a 1% increase in the number of teachers, and a 30% increase in all other staff.
God bless the Full Employment Education Act.
Yeah, so you want the same people that just hired 30% non-teachers to go and fix the schools that are failing kids.
Right. The very people that brought us to this moment in history, and somehow they are going to have this deathbed conversion to educational responsibility and turn the ship around. It's and to this day, post the release of the Johns Hopkins report, I'm not aware of any significant firings or changes in personnel other than the head of the Rhode Island Department of Education, who instigated the study, if you will, as part, of my understanding, a condition of her new employment. All credit to her.
Yep.
Now, here we have ed choice, educational choice, school choice is an incredibly, if you will, vague, I don't want to say a vague term. I guess it's been misappropriated by all sorts of folks to use for their own purposes, political, educational, or otherwise. So how would you define your interpretation, your fine organization's interpretation of school choice? What does it mean to you?
That's great. To me, it means that any child or any family can take the public dollars that are set aside for them and go to whatever educational environment works best for them. Right? It's a really simple concept, right? All dollars should follow all kids to all school types and all opportunities, right? Mm-hmm. That's what school choice means to me, right? It means giving parents the ability to get their children in where they fit in. It means allowing them. So my idea of the purpose of education is different from yours. I want my child to fulfill their best need. I want them to become their best them, right? I want my child to become its best possible person. That may not be what other parents want. And so we put them all in a one-size-fits-all system, and that's just not what it's supposed to be about. School choice is and in fact, it shouldn't even be called school choice. It's really parental freedom, right? Mm-hmm. It's a parental opportunity. It's basically saying the money that we set aside for education should go to the families to go wherever they want. And now I always hear this too. This is my favorite one. Well, you can't give billionaires, money to go to private schools. And I'm like, but you're happy with giving billionaires free money to go to gated, segregated community schools? I mean, we have it backwards here in the way we think about how to solve the problems of education.
I'm listening to you talk, and I'm having a little bit of an out-of-body experience because I'm reflecting on how members of said same educational industrial complex typically characterize, I'm not making this personal to you, but characterize folks in your movement, and a movement, full disclosure, that I embrace wholeheartedly. Folks would literally see you or portray you as standing next to the rails, tying our children to the rails, twirling your mustache and going, the train's coming, we'll get them, and with bags of loot that you're walking away. It's what's astonishing.
Yeah, except those same people. Mm-hmm. You know who don't? Here's interesting. You know who supports school choice? If you look at the public opinion polling, it's people who are poor and low income and children and families of color.
Right.
Right. They want the educational freedom that white folks have had for years. And you know who doesn't support school choice right now? White educated Democrat suburban voters. Now you tell me what is wrong with that picture.
Right.
Right? And what's wrong with that picture is if we're really going to have an empowering society, if libertarian, this is why one of the reasons why I'm drawn to the libertarian idea, right, mm-hmm. is because if we're going to empower society through customization and options and opportunities, this is what it's all about. It's about equalizing a playing field, right? And that's what the irony is traditional public schooling says, well, we are the great leveler, we're the equalizer of the playing field. But in fact, there is more income segregation in America because of traditional public schools, and in some cases, there's more racial segregation. Mm-hmm. And so the reality is private school choice or any school choice, any educational opportunities will change that dynamic because the money doesn't belong to the school, it belongs to the taxpayer and the family.
Right. And there's an institutional racism present that seeks to deny the impact on clearly targeted classes of people, racial and economic, that ignores that reality on a day-to-day basis. You clearly have a group of people who are married to a philosophical concept, and to them that supersedes the importance of education to an entire group of folks who have been marginalized literally since birth, and as a result are essentially imprisoned by their inability to get the training and the skills that they richly need and are richly capable of. It's breathtaking to watch. And so the very people, and this is the deep-seated irony here, the very people that would benefit by most, we are, quote-unquote, protecting them from the evils of quote-unquote, corporate education. Because ultimately, the only legitimate tie-in with the corporate world is the fact that under your scenario, and we'll get into some specific instances in a second, you are introducing the dreaded competition word into education, aren't you?
Yeah, well, so I just think about opportunity, and I want to make a couple points on what you said. Mm-hmm. One, the people in this system are amazing, right? Teachers are amazing. They're working their butts off every day, mm-hmm. right? Some of them are better than others. I mean, like everything, there's good, there's bad. The problem is we have created a structure that is inherently incapable of solving a problem, right? Mm-hmm. We've created this monopolistic structure. And remember, I come from the radical left side of the world, so I'm a liberation theologian by training, right? So I'm as radical left when I grew up as I could be, right? Mm-hmm. And this is absolutely what the sort of liberation theologians in the left wing would say to you is, this is a government-run monopoly and it's terrible. It's oppressive. And that's what it is. Now, the other thing I'll point out to you is we spend $760 billion in K-12 education in America every year, right? Mm-hmm. And I would like you to know about 50% of that goes to for-profit companies already from public schools, maybe 40 to 50%. Textbook companies, busting companies, cleaning companies, name your point, architects, builders. These are not non-profit organizations or things that don't get money. The reality is our traditional public school system is probably the greatest privatizer we've ever seen. It's just the privatizer of the group that they like, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we want to do is, again, separate all that power from the system and give it to families.
Yeah, and you look at the emergence in the economic power of companies whose sole focus is curriculum, and that should tell you enough on just how much money is being made, again, by hand-chosen curriculum companies, of who are of the, let's just say, the curriculum du jour. It just increases the expense while you have these wild convulsions between, approaches on any given year. Regio math one year, who knows next year? It's astonishing to watch. Now, within the school choice,
make me any other thing in America mm-hmm. where we say you don't have the freedom to go where you want to go.
Right.
Right. By the way, the biggest school voucher program in America, you know what it was called? It was called the GI Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944.
Wow, great point.
Right? The GI Bill and Pell Grants are vouchers. Mm-hmm. They allow families to go to private schools, right, using public money. That's all we're talking about here. Children getting in where they fit in. And so, look, ultimately this is about making sure families have the opportunities they need so that their children can be the best them. Because that's what it's about. So I really appreciate you and everything you do, by the way, and appreciate you bringing this issue up.
No, so on the range of school choice, we look at, on one hand, charter schools, and then on the other hand, I'll call it the other side of the range, you look at ESAs, educational savings accounts. And in the next hour, we have a guest. We've had folks from Goldwater before who have been instrumental in implementing educational savings accounts. Where does your organization fall in within that spectrum?
So we believe in fact, with Goldwater, we were one of the first people to support education savings account, and that piece of research that he's gonna talk about mm-hmm. was funded entirely by EdChoice.
Oh, okay.
So we are one of the first organizations to promote it ourselves, Goldwater and Heritage, mm-hmm. and it's the way of the future, right? It is the way that we should be thinking about how we do education. I mean, I foresee an education world where kids can be competent based on what they know, not where they go. And so I'm hoping down the road that I could customize my grandchild's education so that maybe they're going to a college by the time they're 10, in the 10th grade. Mm-hmm. right? They're getting college courses, and I can afford that because I've got an education savings account.
Right.
And what you're going to find out from the research that we funded in Arizona is that families who the families who are benefiting most from this program are low-income families.
Right. Ultimately, because you're giving them for the first time literally a ticket out of what is a failed, I'll call it a prison. And so it's, and again, the results, when we discuss them, people are going to be astonished, because when we were faced with the Johns Hopkins report here, in a sense, for folks who have a libertarian approach to education, it was a moment of what I call tragic liberation. And it's tragic because things have fallen to this point. They've literally, I think we've hit rock bottom. I'm not sure if it's possible to fail children at a higher level. But at the same time, it allowed us to portray, what's the term, inconvenient truths from Mr. Gore?
Yep.
The inconvenient truth is that, again, are you married to a system that's completely failed, can be construed as racist, is certainly the ability to deliver private education. Because here's the dichotomy. One of the finest imports we have in this nation is our higher education system. And our higher education system, in terms of college and trade schools, is literally a destination for the entire planet. Yet even the state schools, by and large, operate in a similar model, if you will, to the private universities in America, which are amongst, again, the finest on the planet. We're blessed here in Providence to have schools like Brown University and the Rhode Island School of Design, who literally attract folks from around the planet. And yet,
right.
How do you have, in a single, I'll call it overarching educational system, how do you have such desperate failure mixed in with such astonishing success? And what's happening, obviously, at the higher education level is that our children in America are no longer well equipped to compete at the Browns, the Columbias, the Harvards, the MITs. The schools are legion, but the point being, we've created this ghetto effect, if you will, this wall around private universities of the highest level that we are institutionally preventing our children from being able to attain. Mix in with that the notion that, again, dyslexia is a huge problem here in Rhode Island. There's been all sorts of state legislation that is supposed to enforce tutoring and teaching availability for children who are dyslexic, who traditionally have very, very high IQs and can often behaviorally be impacted because we don't have an approach that's being implemented. If, in fact, the private schools can be allowed to prosper, here's the killer point, and please jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, if, in fact, in any business, whether it be schools, and yes, I just call schools a business, all right, if any product or service, there is available cash flow, the private sector will rise up and provide alternatives by competing with each other that will be superior simply because of the process of competition. And the ultimate irony here, and I love your thought on this, is that one of the primary beneficiaries will be those great teachers you just discussed, because for the first time in generations, there will be competition to hire the best teachers, as there is competition in literally every other product or service we use on this planet.
And I appreciate that comment, and I understand it, and I appreciate how people think about it. But you know what? I just want kids to get in where they fit in. Mm-hmm. I really don't care whether it's because of competition or it's because of this or that. I just want to create an environment where families can access the kind of a school that I went to, mm-hmm. that I got lucky enough to go to just because my mom could afford it. And that's what I care about most, and that's what I know you care about most. And is a benefit, is a side benefit of that we're going to get everyone better, is the whole rising tide is going to lift all boats? Yes, absolutely. But really what I want a just system of education for all families. Now, that's what I care about. Now,
I know you've only got a couple minutes left. What I want to focus on for a few minutes, and we hope to have you on again, is, if you will, the value not only of your organization, but let's just take it at its most easily accessed level, which is your website. And your website is a wealth of information about the status of a variety of initiatives, whether it be educational savings account, performance levels. Your website is rich with information so that not only educators, professionals in the field, but also parents, ordinary folks can access it. It's very accessible. It's very well done. Tell us a little bit about the website and some of the information that you offer to people as a result of your ongoing research.
Yeah, so it's edchoice.org, and what you can do, and it's built to be friendly for everyone. If you're a family and you live in the state with a school choice program, you can find out whether you qualify by clicking on our dashboard. If you're a media person and you want to find out how many kids have gone into a school choice program over time, you could go to our website and download the data chart for, let's say, the state of Rhode Island, right, and how many people choose. If you're a researcher and you want to find out what the academic impact of the Indiana School Choice Program is, or the parental satisfaction of the Arizona program, you can go to our website and find this out. And so, it really does create an opportunity for everyone to access the information they need, and particularly families. We get literally hundreds of calls from families saying, "Can I qualify? Do I qualify? Where do I go?" And so that all comes on our website, and you can find that. And it's also, we have a group of people that do training and events. So we will always come out, and if people ask us to come out, we will come out and speak. We'll bring speakers. We actually helped over 270 people last year, 270 events. We provided speakers for 270 different events, almost one a day, right? And so our organization is lucky enough to be able to do this and be a support for groups on the ground, and much like anyone in New York State. So we're happy to help.
And I guess final thought: what if you were to give a report card grade right now to the state of school choice nationwide? How is it actually going? Is it we're familiar now that through your site, ironically, which is where I initially came in contact with your organization when I was doing research on ESAs. We now know that ESAs are starting to spread across the nation. But are you happy with the progress? Is it slow and steady?
Great question. It is slow and steady, but I give us a C. And that's because we're still stuck in this idea of reforming, right? We need to reform education, people say. That's actually not what I want. I want to transform education, right? Mm-hmm. When we think about reform, we essentially leave the system the same, and we essentially make that permission is required and obtained, right? If you transform it, you're starting with the values that people care about. You're not saying I want to be left with the same system, and innovation is permissionless, right? And so I think we've come a long way, but we've got a lot longer way to go, and I'd like to do it before I pass.
Well, your entire life's work has actually been finding ways to bring education to folks who probably never had the type of options that so many of us had, and it's astonishing good works and good deeds. How can folks get in contact with the organization? How can they support it if they're in a position to? And
we'd love that. So again, the best way to access us is go to edchoice.org. Mm-hmm. My email is on there. You can email me directly, Robert Enlow at rcenlow@edchoice.org. Happy to take any support, questions, criticism. We engage with everyone.
Right. I want to close on this note, and I'm so grateful for you taking the time to do this, and we hope you'll make it to Rhode Island, because we are, if you will, I think it's fair to say, a target-rich environment for your philosophy and your work ethic. Lord, we need the help. If I could put up up in the sky a Batman-like logo, and you folks would magically appear, we would be great. I just want to read your favorite quote, and again, this is directly off of edchoice.org. The tragedy and irony is that a system dedicated to enabling all children to acquire a common language and the values of U.S. citizenship, to giving all children equal educational opportunity, should in practice exacerbate the stratification of society and provide highly unequal education opportunity. And of course, that's Milton Friedman.
Absolutely.
Here's
the way I'd put it in my own words. Mm-hmm. The system of power is distributed unequally, and it needs to be changed.
Excellent.
So I appreciate you very much, Pat, and I thank you so much for having me on.
Robert Enlow, he is the president and CEO of EdChoice. Of course, that's at www.edchoice.org. It is a site rich in philosophy, rich in background, rich in data. If you are a parent, you are a grandparent, you need to spend some time on this website so that we can essentially break free of possibly, what's the most overused term this year? The status quo. It's not time for reform. It's time for transformative change. And I have found few resources as adept at promoting this on so many different levels as your organization and your website. So thank you. God bless you for your work, and let's talk soon.
Thanks so much. Talk to you again. Thank you.
edchoice.org. That's, ultimately, as a state, we are looking to, and I'm not looking to indict individuals or personalities. If we continue to look, though, to the same people, the same philosophies, if I can even dignify our education in this state with the term philosophy, if we're looking for, if you will, again, a deathbed conversion, it's not happening. There has nothing has occurred, publicly at least, since the onset, if you will, and I use the term onset intentionally, of the Johns Hopkins report, to suggest that other than superficial changes to some bricks and mortar, other than lipstick, if you will, on the proverbial pig, in the form of a rush series of basic fundamental repairs, that nothing is happening other than a lot of meetings. Again, I'll assume that these folks are well-intentioned. A lot of conversation, no dramatic change. During this process, folks have alluded to up to a 10 years before we can, really start to see improvement. Balderdash, are we going to lose another 10 years worth of students? Students who, by all account, are great kids, for whom adults continue to fail. We quote this a lot in this show. The hero of the 19th century cartoon Pogo was wont to quote, "I have seen the enemy and he is us." I don't know if there's a single situation here in Rhode Island, despite all the corruption, all the chaos, which best epitomizes that, than our school systems. We have the capacity for overnight transformative change. We simply lack the political will. And I can only appeal to whoever happens to hear this, to people to summon the collective outrage of a generation of parents who now look to their children in their teens, who are incapable of competing, if you will, in a 21st century global community. The will is there, the strength is there, the character is there, the fundamental skills are there. But if you've been left behind, as tens of thousands of Rhode Island students have, by school union leaders who, incredibly enough, despite their job focus being working conditions for who were shocked and appalled, surprised by what was revealed in the Johns Hopkins report. If you're looking at school administrators in an industrial complex of competing values who sincerely see children as a necessary inconvenience to highly profitable businesses, we need these kids to be around because, well, how do we justify all the money that we spend? If we don't achieve through sheer outrage the transformational change necessary, then we will continue to wallow in both a moral and economic abyss. We're going to take a few moments now. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the Naked City. Hey, next Friday, you have an opportunity to get down to Thayer Street. The good folks down there are going to be holding winter festivities. It looks like one heck of a lot of fun. We'll be supplying you the link at facebook.com/thecoalitionradio and of course at coalitionradio.us. This is one of the most wonderful times to live here in New England. Rhode Island, of course, is the birthplace of the American movement, the birthplace of American freedom, is the birthplace of liberty. So we've got Thanksgiving coming up, and we need not only to celebrate, take a moment to celebrate our heritage, but at the same time, when addressing issues as we do on this show, reflect intensely on that heritage and whether or not we are, quote unquote, maximizing it for the good of all. Our prior guest points out where sadly we are not. Stay tuned. We're going to be back in just a couple of minutes. We've got folks from the Goldwater Institute. They're going to talk about a landmark study which will focus, if you will, on the results of these educational savings accounts on an economic level. And puts the lie to the notion that school choice is to benefit wealthy corporations, school choice is to benefit the few, and that somehow we will be failing our students if we do not provide them opportunities and the ability to move the resources necessary so that they can reach their full human potential. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.